Welcome to Clandestine Cases. Chapter 1, A Quiet Departure. The morning sun cast a golden hue over St. Mary Mead, illuminating the thatched cottages and well-tended gardens that characterize the quintessential English village. Birds chirped melodiously, and the air was filled with the scent of blooming roses and freshly baked bread, wafting from Mrs. Dobbins's bakery. It was a picture of serene village life, untouched by the complexities of the wider world, or so it seemed on this particular day. Miss Marple strolled along the cobbled path leading to St. Peter's Church, her knitted shawl draped gracefully over her shoulders. The village was abuzz with the news of Mrs. Sylvia Carraway's sudden passing. Mrs. Carraway, a reclusive widow, had long been a subject of quiet speculation among the villagers. Known for her peculiar habits and sharp tongue, she seldom engaged in the cheerful gossip that animated St. Mary Mead. As Miss Marple approached the church, she observed the small gathering assembled for the funeral. The turnout was sparse, yet each mourner seemed to carry an air of restrained sorrow, tinged with something more elusive. Among them were distant relatives she recognized from previous encounters. Mr. Thomas Carraway, the elder brother who managed the family estate, and Miss Beatrice Harcourt, a niece from London visiting for the summer. Additionally, a young maid named Emily was present, her demeanor noticeably subdued. Entering the church, Miss Marple took a seat near the back, her eyes discreetly scanning the congregation. The interior was modestly decorated with white lilies, arranged meticulously around the altar. The pews were filled with a mix of familiar faces and those she barely knew, each person's expression a tapestry of grief and, perhaps, something unspoken. The Reverend began the service with a solemn prayer, his voice steady but lacking the usual fervor that Miss Marple had come to expect. As the service progressed, Miss Marple's attention was drawn to the interactions among the mourners. Mr. Carraway conversed quietly with Miss Harcourt, his stiff demeanor contrasting with her more animated manner. Emily, the maid, seemed particularly withdrawn, her eyes darting nervously around the room, as if guarding a hidden secret. After the service, Miss Marple lingered, watching as the attendees made their way to the churchyard. The procession moved towards the burial plot, the somber ceremony unfolding beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. The grave was simple, yet the air around it seemed thick with unspoken tensions. As the crowd dispersed, Miss Marple found herself approached by Miss Harcourt. "Miss Marple," she began hesitantly, "I'm so grateful you could come today. Sylvia was difficult, but she had her reasons." Miss Marple offered a gentle smile. "She certainly was a woman of strong character, Miss Harcourt. I hope you're coping well." Miss Harcourt nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It's been a trying time. The family is not quite united, as you might say." Miss Marple's curiosity was piqued, but she chose to keep her thoughts guarded. "I can imagine. If there's anything I can do to help, please don't hesitate to let me know." With a grateful smile, Miss Harcourt excused herself, leaving Miss Marple to contemplate the undercurrents of tension she had observed. She turned her attention to Emily, who was now speaking in hushed tones with Mr. Carraway. The maid's nervous glances and fidgeting suggested a story untold. Later that afternoon, as Miss Marple enjoyed a cup of tea at the village green's quaint cafe, she reflected on the morning's events. The sparse attendance at the funeral, the strained interactions among the mourners, and Emily's peculiar behavior all hinted at underlying complexities. Mrs. Carraway's reputation as a sharp-tongued widow might have masked deeper familial discord. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Dr. Samuel Whittaker, the village physician. He approached her table with a courteous nod. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple. I trust you're finding the day manageable." "Quite so, Doctor." Whittaker, Though I must admit, Mrs. Carraway's passing has left me with more questions than answers. Dr. Whittaker offered a sympathetic smile. It was unexpected, certainly. The doctor who examined her declared it natural causes, heart failure in her sleep, nothing out of the ordinary, as far as medical science can tell. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that was my understanding. Yet sometimes what appears natural can have a more intricate foundation. The doctor chuckled softly. Indeed, Miss Marple. Though in my experience, Mrs. Carraway was always meticulous about her health, it's hard to imagine anything sinister. Miss Marple leaned back, her mind racing through the snippets of conversation and behavior she had observed. You know, Dr. Whittaker, I believe there's often more to a person's life than meets the eye. Mrs. Carraway was certainly a private individual. Dr. Whittaker agreed. That she was. She kept to herself, maintained her routines diligently. I suppose that's part of why her sudden passing has so many people surprised. As he took his leave, Miss Marple's gaze settled on the bustling cafe around her. The village green was a hive of activity, children chasing each other with gleeful abandon, elderly couples strolling arm in arm, and neighbors exchanging pleasantries. Yet beneath this idyllic surface, she sensed hidden currents. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple decided to pay a visit to the Carraway estate the following day. The manor, an imposing structure of ivy-clad stone, stood at the village's edge, its windows reflecting the dappled sunlight. As she approached the grand entrance, she was greeted by Mr. Carraway himself, a stern man with a stern set to his jaw. Miss Marple, he greeted her curtly. I didn't expect you to visit so soon. I thought it prudent to offer my condolences in person, Mr. Carraway, and perhaps lend a listening ear if you'd permit. Mr. Carraway nodded stiffly. Thank you, Miss Marple. It's been a difficult time for all of us. They entered the manor's foyer, where Miss Marple took in the opulent, yet somewhat austere decor. Portraits of stern ancestors adorned the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her every move. As they settled into the drawing room, Mr. Carraway poured tea with mechanical precision. I must admit, Sylvia's passing has left a void, he began, his voice measured. The estate requires attention, and with no immediate heirs, the future is uncertain. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. I imagine it's a trying period for the family. If there's anything I can do to assist, please let me know. Mr. Carraway offered a tight smile. Your kindness is appreciated, Miss Marple. Perhaps in time. As the afternoon waned, Miss Marple found herself alone with her thoughts. The scattered mourners, the strained interactions, and Emily's nervous behavior all painted a picture of concealed strife. She recalled the peculiar glances exchanged between Emily and Mr. Carraway, and the way Miss Harcourt seemed out of place among the family dynamics. Determined to delve deeper, Miss Marple decided to seek out Emily the following morning. The maid's nervousness suggested she held keys to the mystery that Mrs. Carraway's death had inadvertently uncovered. The next day dawned crisp and clear. Miss Marple made her way to the manor, greeted by the same stern expression from Mr. Carraway. Good morning, Miss Marple. What brings you back so soon? I'd like to speak with Emily, if possible, Miss Marple replied warmly. I believe she might have some insights that could be of help. Mr. Carraway hesitated before responding. Emily is attending to the morning duties. You may find her in the kitchen. Miss Marple thanked him and proceeded to the manor's kitchen, a bustling hub of activity where pots clanged and the scent of brewing tea filled the air. Emily was there, her hands deftly preparing breakfast, her eyes darting around nervously. Good morning, Emily, Miss Marple greeted gently. May I have a word with you? Emily looked up startled, then quickly composed herself. "Of course, Miss Marple. How can I help you?" Miss Marple took a seat at the small kitchen table, her gaze kind yet probing. "I understand that Mrs. Carroway was a private person, but sometimes those closest to us notice things others do not. Is there anything you'd like to share?" Emily hesitated, her fingers twisting the edge of her apron. I suppose there are things. Mrs. Carroway could be difficult at times. She had her secrets." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes encouraging. "Everyone has secrets, Emily. Sometimes sharing them can ease the burden." Emily took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. There were disagreements, especially about the estate. Mrs. Carroway was adamant about keeping things as they were, despite pressures to modernize. Some family members weren't pleased. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, Emily. That's very helpful." As she left the kitchen, Miss Marple's mind was abuzz with possibilities. Disagreements over the estate, family tensions, and Emily's cryptic remarks all hinted at deeper issues. She resolved to observe the family dynamics more closely, confident that the truth lay hidden beneath layers of propriety and silence. That evening, as twilight settled over St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple sat on her veranda reflecting on the day's revelations. The manor's shadow stretched long across the garden, the once comforting sight now tinged with an undercurrent of unease. The villagers, unaware of the undercurrents, continued their daily routines, blissfully ignorant of the mystery unraveling at the heart of their community. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes distant yet observant. In St. Mary Mead, as in all places, she mused, human nature was both a mystery and a key to unlocking it. And as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, she felt a sense of anticipation. The quiet village held its secrets close, but Miss Marple was determined to uncover them, one subtle clue at a time. In Chapter 2, An Unexpected Confession. The village of St. Mary Mead basked in the gentle embrace of an autumn afternoon, the golden leaves rustling softly in the mild breeze. Miss Marple sat comfortably in her favorite armchair by the window, a steaming cup of tea cradled in her hands. Her eyes followed the playful dance of children chasing each other along the cobblestone paths, their laughter adding a cheerful melody to the tranquil scene. Her thoughts, however, were not entirely at ease. The recent passing of Mrs. Sylvia Carroway had stirred a quiet disturbance in the village's otherwise placid existence. Miss Marple found herself reflecting on the peculiarities surrounding the widow's death. Despite the doctor's assurance of natural causes, there was something unspoken, a shadow lurking beneath the surface of polite condolences and whispered speculations. Deciding to seek clarity, Miss Marple made her way to the Carroway estate the following morning. The manor, an imposing structure of ivy-clad stone, stood at the village's edge, its presence both commanding and austere. As she approached, the wrought-iron gates creaked softly in the breeze, and she was greeted by the same stern-faced butler who had shown her in the previous day's visit. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he greeted her with a curt nod. "Dr. Whitaker is expecting you in the drawing room." Miss Marple offered a polite smile. "Thank you, James. I appreciate your assistance." Inside, the manor was a study in restrained elegance. High ceilings and grand chandeliers contrasted with the modest furnishings, creating an atmosphere of quiet dignity. Dr. Samuel Whitaker, the village physician, stood by the fireplace, his expression thoughtful. "Good morning, Miss Marple," he greeted her warmly. "I trust your journey was comfortable." "Quite so, thank you, Doctor." "Whitaker," she replied, taking a seat opposite him. I wanted to discuss Mrs. Carraway's passing further. There are still a few details that puzzle me. The doctor nodded, his demeanor earnest. Of course. I did everything by the book. Her heart condition was well documented, and her recent checkup showed no alarming changes. It was, indeed, a natural death. Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. I understand, but sometimes the heart fails in unexpected ways. Did you notice anything unusual in her behavior leading up to her passing? Dr. Whitaker pondered for a moment. Now that you mention it, Mrs. Carraway did seem more anxious than usual in her final weeks. She often complained of sleeplessness and mentioned hearing noises at night, though I dismissed it as the stress of managing the estate. Miss Marple's interest was piqued. Noises, you say? Did she ever elaborate on what she was hearing? Not in detail. He admitted she was a private woman, reluctant to discuss her personal struggles, but her anxiety was palpable. Before Miss Marple could probe further, the heavy oak doors swung open, and a young maid entered the room, her cheeks flushed with urgency. It was Emily, the same maid who had attended Mrs. Carraway during her final days. Her usually composed demeanor was marred by visible distress. "Excuse me, Dr. Whitaker?" Emily said hesitantly, her eyes darting between the doctor and Miss Marple. "May I have a word with you, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple nodded, gesturing for Emily to join them. "Of course, Emily. Please, have a seat." Emily settled into the chair beside Miss Marple, her hands trembling slightly. I need to tell you something about Mrs. Carraway's last days," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "She was very nervous, more than usual. She kept saying she heard voices in the night, voices that weren't there." Miss Marple listened intently, her keen eyes never leaving Emily's face. "Voices, you say? Did she mention who they belonged to or what they were saying?" Emily shook her head. "No, not specifically, but she seemed convinced that someone was watching her, following her. She became quite paranoid, always checking the windows and doors, making sure nothing was amiss." Dr. Whitaker frowned thoughtfully. That does add a layer of complexity to her condition. However, from a medical standpoint, anxiety can exacerbate heart conditions, potentially leading to fatal outcomes. Miss Marple pondered this silently, her mind weaving through the possibilities. "Emily, do you recall if Mrs. Carraway received any visitors, or if there were any unusual occurrences around the manor during those weeks?" Before Emily could respond, the room's tranquility was abruptly shattered by the sound of hurried footsteps approaching. A figure, clad in dark overcoat and hat, entered, his presence commanding immediate attention. It was Mr. Thomas Carraway, Sylvia's elder brother, whose stern visage often masked his underlying concerns about the family's affairs. "Apologies for the interruption," he stated curtly, his eyes briefly meeting Miss Marple's before turning to Dr. Whitaker. "I see you are discussing matters of importance." Miss Marple offered a polite smile. "Yes, Mr. Carraway. We were just discussing some concerns regarding your sister's final days." Mr. Carraway's expression remained impassive, but there was a flicker of tension in his eyes. "I trust all is well, Doctor." Dr. Whitaker nodded. "Indeed, Mr. Carraway. We were discussing some aspects of Mrs. Carraway's health that might be of interest to Miss Marple." Miss Marple met his gaze steadily. "We were just speaking with Emily about Mrs. Carraway's recent anxiety and her claims of hearing voices." Mr. Carraway stiffened slightly, his jaw tightening. "I see. Well, Sylvia was under a great deal of stress managing the estate, especially with the impending changes proposed by some family members. Perhaps that contributed to her condition. Emily, sensing the rising tension, glanced nervously between Miss Marple and Mr. Carroway. I should go," she stammered, standing abruptly. "I apologize for the interruption." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on Emily's arm. "Take care, Emily. If you remember anything else, please do not hesitate to reach out." As Emily hastily exited the room, the atmosphere remained thick with unspoken words. Miss Marple turned her attention back to Mr. Carroway, who now regarded her with a guarded expression. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carroway," she said softly. "If you think of anything else that might shed light on Mrs. Carroway's condition, please let me know." With a curt nod, Mr. Carroway rose and left the room, the heavy doors closing behind him with a definitive thud. Miss Marple remained seated, her mind racing with the fragments of conversation and the sudden departure of Emily. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple reflected on the evening's revelations. Mrs. Carroway's increasing paranoia and claims of hearing voices suggested a psychological dimension to her decline, one that might intersect with the family's dynamics and the pressures exerted upon her by those around her. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple resolved to observe the Carroway estate more closely. She knew that in St. Mary Mead, as in all places, the surface often concealed deeper currents, and it was her gentle persistence that would bring those hidden truths to light. Later that day, Miss Marple took a leisurely walk through the village, her mind preoccupied with the morning's discussions. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the well-tended gardens and thatched roofs. She passed by Mrs. Dobbins's bakery, where the enticing aroma of freshly baked scones wafted through the air, momentarily lifting her spirits. Her thoughts returned to Emily's confession. The maid's unease had been palpable, and her abrupt departure hinted at something more substantial, a secret perhaps too burdensome to share openly. Miss Marple contemplated the possible motivations behind Mrs. Carroway's distress. Was it purely a manifestation of her anxiety, or was there an external factor contributing to her deteriorating condition? As she approached the village green, Miss Marple noticed a small gathering of residents engaged in animated conversation beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree. She recognized several familiar faces: Mr. Phipps, the local shopkeeper, Mrs. Appleby, the schoolteacher, and Mr. Lacey, a retired naval officer. They were discussing the recent changes proposed for the Carroway estate, including plans to modernize parts of the manor and expand the grounds. Miss Marple listened attentively, picking up on the subtle tensions beneath their polite discourse. "Modernizing the estate," Mr. Phipps remarked, "is necessary to maintain its grandeur. But I fear it may disrupt the traditional harmony we've all come to cherish." Mrs. Appleby nodded thoughtfully. Indeed, change is often met with resistance, especially from those who are deeply attached to the old ways. Mr. Lacey added, "Sylvia was a strong-willed woman. She likely saw these changes as an infringement on her autonomy." Miss Marple's mind connected the dots. The proposed changes could have been a source of significant stress for Mrs. Carroway, potentially exacerbating her health issues and contributing to her paranoia. Moreover, such tensions within the family could have led to ulterior motives, perhaps even malice, masked by the veneer of polite society. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the village in a warm amber glow, Miss Marple felt a renewed sense of purpose. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead held its secrets close, but she was determined to uncover them, guided by her unwavering belief in the power of observation and understanding human nature. Returning home, she decided to pay a visit to Emily once more, hoping to glean additional insights before the maid's reticence grew into complete silence. As twilight settled over the village, Miss Marple prepared herself for the conversations yet to come, aware that the path to the truth was often winding and fraught with unexpected revelations. In the quiet of her drawing room, Miss Marple sat down to pen her thoughts, the ink flowing steadily as she mapped out the connections and questions that now occupied her mind. The mystery of Mrs. Carraway's death was far from resolved, and Miss Marple felt the thrill of the investigation stirring within her, a gentle determination to bring clarity to the shadows that had fallen over St. Mary Mead. Chapter 3. A Visitor's Tale. The afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's sitting room, casting delicate patterns upon the floral wallpaper. The room was a haven of comfort, with its well-worn armchair, shelves laden with books, and the faint scent of Earl Grey tea lingering in the air. Miss Marple sat by the window, knitting a scarf for the upcoming winter, her sharp eyes occasionally drifting to the garden, where children played under the watchful eyes of their parents. A gentle knock at the door signaled the arrival of Colonel Arthur Bantry, a retired military man and one of Miss Marple's dear friends. His presence always brought a sense of calm and order to her otherwise quiet life. The colonel entered, his uniform impeccably pressed despite his retirement, and offered a warm smile. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he greeted, removing his hat and placing it neatly on a hook by the door. "I trust I'm not intruding?" "Not at all, Colonel. Please do come in," Miss Marple replied, setting her knitting aside. "It's always a pleasure to see you." Colonel Bantry settled into the armchair opposite her, adjusting his spectacles. As he took a sip of his tea, the two friends had shared countless conversations over the years, discussing everything from village happenings to more personal matters. "I wanted to speak with you about something rather peculiar," the colonel began, his tone indicating the seriousness of the matter. "It concerns the late Mrs. Sylvia Carraway." Miss Marple leaned forward, her interest piqued. "Oh, what about her?" "The other day I was speaking with Dolly," Colonel Bantry continued, referring to his wife, Dolly. "Dolly mentioned that Mrs. Carraway had been receiving visits from a traveling antiques dealer named Mr. Redcliffe. He was often seen at her home, showing interest in some of her possessions." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "A traveling antiques dealer, you say? And this Mr. Redcliffe, was he a frequent visitor?" "Quite so," the colonel affirmed. "He seemed rather persistent, almost eager. But what struck me as odd was that Sylvia's estranged nephew, Lionel, had also been making appearances." "Lionel hasn't been on speaking terms with Sylvia for years." Miss Marple's eyes sparkled with curiosity. "Estranged, you say? That certainly adds an intriguing layer to the situation. Did they ever discuss anything specific during these visits?" The colonel shook his head. "Not that I'm aware of. Dolly mentioned that Sylvia had been quite guarded, rarely sharing details about her interactions with Mr. Redcliffe or Lionel. However, there was something else that caught my attention." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, inviting him to continue. "Dolly told me that Sylvia had recently spoken of a new will," Colonel Bantry disclosed, lowering his voice. "Though to our knowledge, no one has seen this document. It's all very hush, hush." Miss Marple's mind began to race. A new will could have significant implications, especially considering the presence of an estranged nephew and a persistent antiques dealer. "A new will, you say? That could certainly cause some ripples within the family." The colonel nodded, a hint of skepticism in his expression. "I dismissed it initially as idle talk. Sylvia was known for her dramatic flair, and perhaps she was merely contemplating changes to her estate. But now, with everything that has happened, I can't help but wonder if there's more to it." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand over his. "Colonel, you have a keen sense for these things. While it may indeed be idle talk, is worth considering the possibility that there's a thread worth pulling. May I ask if you know anything about Mr. Redcliffe's business dealings or his relationship with Sylvia?" Colonel Bantry sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Mr. Redcliffe is a well-known antiques dealer, reputable in his trade. I've never heard of him before, but his frequent visits to Sylvia's home suggest a keen interest in her collection. As for Lionel, his sudden interest in the estate is equally perplexing." Miss Marple tapped her finger against her chin, deep in thought. It might be beneficial to observe their interactions more closely. Sometimes the truth reveals itself through the smallest of details. Just then, Dolly Bantry entered the room, carrying a tray with freshly baked scones and a pot of tea. She placed them on the side table and offered a warm smile. "I thought you might enjoy a little refreshment, dear." "Colonel, you've been at it all afternoon." "Thank you, Dolly," Colonel Bantry replied gratefully. Miss Marple accepted a scone, her eyes still fixed on the Colonel. "Dolly, have you noticed anything unusual about Mrs. Carroway's behavior in recent weeks? Any changes in her routine or demeanor?" Dolly took a seat beside Miss Marple, her hands deftly arranging the teacups. "Now that you mention it, Sylvia's been rather anxious lately. She seemed preoccupied, often lost in thought. There were days when she wouldn't come out of her study until late in the evening." Miss Marple nodded. "Anxious, you say? Did she ever mention what was causing her distress?" Dolly hesitated for a moment before answering. "She did speak of feeling like someone was watching her, especially at night. I chalked it up to her becoming more reclusive. But now, considering what Colonel has shared, it might be something more substantial." The Colonel leaned forward, his expression earnest. "That's precisely why I wanted to discuss this with you, Miss Marple. Your insight could be invaluable." Miss Marple smiled gently. "I'm happy to help in any way I can. Perhaps the next step is to speak with Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel to understand the nature of their visits and any potential motives they might have." Colonel Bantry looked relieved. "I was hoping you might suggest something along those lines. I can arrange for you to meet with them, if you wish." Miss Marple considered the proposition. "That would be most helpful. It's important to approach this delicately, ensuring that we don't alarm anyone unnecessarily." As they continued their conversation, Miss Marple's mind was already weaving through the possibilities. The presence of Mr. Redcliffe, an antiques dealer with an interest in Sylvia's possessions, and Lionel, the estranged nephew, both pointed towards potential motives related to inheritance, and the mention of a new will further complicated the matter, hinting at changes that could benefit certain parties over others. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple found herself at the Carroway estate. The Grand Manor, now a focal point of her investigations, the estate, with its sprawling gardens and stately facade, held many secrets within its walls. She was greeted by James, the butler, whose discreet demeanor suggested a man accustomed to managing the household's affairs with minimal fuss. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple." James greeted her with a respectful nod. "Mr. Redcliffe and Mr. Lionel are expecting you in the drawing room." "Thank you, James. Please let them know I've arrived," Miss Marple replied warmly. As she entered the drawing room, Miss Marple was introduced to Mr. Redcliffe, a man in his early 50s with a distinguished air and a keen eye for detail. His presence exuded confidence, yet there was an undercurrent of nervousness in his demeanor. "Miss Marple, it's a pleasure to meet you." Mr. Redcliffe extended his hand. "Colonel Bantry has spoken highly of you." Miss Marple returned the gesture with a polite smile. The pleasure is mine, Mr. Redcliffe. I understand you have a keen interest in antiques. Indeed, he replied, his eyes briefly flickering towards the array of artifacts adorning the room. Mrs. Carraway possesses a remarkable collection, and I was hoping to discuss a few pieces that might be of mutual interest. Before Miss Marple could delve deeper, the door opened once more, and Lionel Carraway entered the room. A young man in his late 30s, Lionel carried an air of arrogance tempered by visible wariness. His eyes met Miss Marple's briefly before he offered a curt nod. "Miss Marple," Lionel greeted, his tone formal. "I assume you're here to discuss the estate matters." Miss Marple observed the interactions between the three individuals, noting the subtle tensions and guarded expressions. "Yes, I believe there are a few things we need to clarify regarding Mrs. Carraway's recent activities." Mr. Redcliffe cleared his throat, his gaze shifting between Miss Marple and Lionel. "I was merely assisting Mrs. Carraway in appraising some of her more valuable items. She has a discerning taste, and I admire her collection greatly," Lionel interjected, his voice tinged with impatience. "Assisting her, you say?" "I was unaware Mrs. Carraway was open to outside opinions on her possessions." Miss Marple raised a hand gently, signaling for... "Perhaps we can all benefit from sharing our perspectives. Mr. Redcliffe, could you elaborate on the nature of your visits and any discussions you had with Mrs. Carraway about her estate?" Mr. Redcliffe hesitated for a moment before responding. "Certainly, Mrs. Carraway has always been particular about her belongings. Recently, she expressed interest in diversifying her collection, seeking rare pieces that would enhance its uniqueness. We discussed several items, but nothing beyond that." Lionel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Diversifying, you say? I find it odd that my aunt would seek to expand her collection at this stage. Was there any mention of financial concerns or debts?" Miss Marple leaned forward, her gaze steady. "No mention of debts, Mr. Carraway. Or perhaps something else?" Lionel shook his head, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. "No, there was no discussion of debts. My aunt has always been prudent with her finances." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Interesting. Mrs. Carraway also mentioned something about a new will, correct? Has either of you seen this document?" Mr. Redcliffe exchanged a brief glance with Lionel before replying. "I'm not privy to the contents of her will. That's a matter strictly between her and her legal advisor." Lionel sighed, running a hand through his hair. "As far as I know, there have been no changes to the will. My aunt was very clear about her intentions regarding her estate." Miss Marple sensed the evasion in their responses. "Yet Mrs. Carraway spoke of a new will recently, did she not? Such a change could have significant implications for all involved." Both men shifted uncomfortably, the air thick with unspoken truths. Miss Marple remained silent for a moment, allowing the tension to settle before speaking again. "I appreciate your honesty, gentlemen. It's clear that Mrs. Carraway was a woman of many layers, and perhaps her intentions were not entirely clear to those around her." As the conversation drew to a close, Miss Marple couldn't shake the feeling that she was missing a crucial piece of the puzzle. The presence of Mr. Redcliffe, the estranged nephew, and the mention of a new will all pointed towards hidden motives and potential secrets, waiting to be uncovered. Later that evening, Miss Marple found herself reflecting on the day's events as she strolled through the village green. The setting sun cast long shadows across the neatly trimmed lawns, and the familiar sights and sounds of St. Mary Mead provided a comforting backdrop to her restless thoughts. She considered the implications of a new will and the possible reasons why Mrs. Carraway might have felt the need to change her testamentary intentions. Was it out of fear, greed, or perhaps a desire to protect someone? The presence of Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel suggested financial interests, but Miss Marple knew that human motives were rarely so straightforward. Determined to seek further insight, Miss Marple decided to visit Dolly Bantry the following morning. Perhaps Dolly, with her close relationship with both Colonel Bantry and the Carraway family, held the key to understanding the recent developments. As night settled over the village, Miss Marple felt a sense of anticipation. The threads of mystery were beginning to intertwine, and she was resolute in her quest to unravel the truth behind Mrs. Sylvia Carraway's enigmatic final days. With her characteristic blend of intuition and keen observation, she was confident that the answers lay hidden within the intricate tapestry of village life. Chapter 4. The Vanishing Will. The morning sun rose gently over St. Mary Mead, casting a warm glow upon the village's charming facade. Miss Marple, ever observant, noted the way the light danced upon the dew-kissed petals of the rose bushes that lined the cobbled streets. The village was beginning to stir, with the familiar sounds of daily life unfolding in harmonious rhythm. After a quiet breakfast, Miss Marple decided it was time to delve deeper into the mystery surrounding Mrs. Sylvia Carraway's sudden death. She had considered the previous conversations and was particularly intrigued by the mention of a new will. Determined to uncover the truth, she made her way to the office of Mr. Harold Fenwick, the solicitor entrusted with handling Mrs. Carraway's estate. Mr. Fenwick's office was located in the heart of St. Mary Mead, a respectable building with large windows that allowed natural light to flood the room. The interior was immaculate, with neatly arranged papers and shelves brimming with legal tomes. Miss Marple knocked softly on the doorframe, which swung open to reveal a middle-aged man with a stern yet courteous demeanor. "Good morning, Miss Marple." Mr. Fenwick greeted her, his voice steady. "Please, do come in." Miss Marple smiled warmly and took a seat opposite his large mahogany desk. "Good morning, Mr. Fenwick. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." "Of course," he replied, adjusting his spectacles. "How can I assist you today?" Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes keen with curiosity. "I wanted to discuss the matter of Mrs. Carraway's will. There have been some unsettling developments that I believe warrant further investigation." Mr. Fenwick's expression remained professional, though Miss Marple could detect a hint of tension in his posture. "Certainly. What exactly are you referring to?" "Well," Miss Marple began thoughtfully, "I've been informed that Mrs. Carraway may have been contemplating a new will in the days leading up to her death. However, there seems to be some confusion regarding its existence and whereabouts." Mr. Fenwick raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "A new will, you say? As far as I am aware, the only will in existence is the one dated several years ago, which leaves everything to her nephew, Lionel." Miss Marple nodded slowly. "Yes, that is my understanding as well. However, there have been reports suggesting that Mrs. Carraway may have shared the contents of a new will with someone close to her." Mr. Fenwick leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "I assure you, Miss Marple, that all relevant documents have been accounted for. The will on file is the most recent one submitted by Mrs. Carraway. If there had been a new will, it would have been lodged here immediately." Miss Marple's gaze did not waver. "That is precisely why I find this situation peculiar. If Mrs. Carraway did indeed draft a new will, it appears to have vanished. Such an occurrence is highly irregular and suggests that someone may have tampered with the documents." Mr. Fenwick sighed, running a hand through his greying hair. "I must admit, Miss Marple, this is the first I've heard of any such thing. All I have is the standard procedure we follow. Once a will is signed, it is promptly filed and copies are kept securely." Miss Marple pondered his words, her mind already piecing together the possibilities. If the new will existed, who else besides yourself would have access to it? "Only those directly involved in the estate's management," Mr. Fenwick replied. "This includes my assistant, Miss Clara Hughes, and the butler, James. Both are trusted members of the household staff." Miss Marple thanked him for his time and left the office, her thoughts swirling with suspicions. The idea that someone within the household might have a motive to tamper with the will was unsettling, yet entirely plausible given the strained relationship she'd observed. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple returned to the Carraway estate. The grand manor stood as an imposing sentinel against the backdrop of the village, its ivy-clad walls concealing secrets within. She was greeted once more by James, the butler, whose polite demeanor remained unchanged despite the growing tension. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he greeted her formally. "Is there something more I can assist you with today?" Miss Marple smiled gently. "Good afternoon, James. I was hoping to have a word with Emily. She mentioned something about a new will before her mistress passed, didn't she?" James's expression flickered momentarily, a shadow crossing his features, before he masked it with a courteous smile. "I believe so, Miss Marple. Emily is in the kitchen at the moment, but I can have her join us shortly." Miss Marple nodded and took a seat in the drawing room, the room's opulent decor contrasting with the undercurrent of unease that seemed to permeate the household. After a short wait, Emily entered, her usually composed facade now marred by visible distress. Her eyes darted nervously around the room before settling on Miss Marple. "Good afternoon, Emily," Miss Marple greeted her softly. "May I speak with you about something important?" Emily hesitated, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Of course, Miss Marple." "What is it?" Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soothing yet firm. "I understand that Mrs. Carraway confided in you about a new will. Could you tell me more about that?" Emily took a deep breath, her shoulders trembling slightly. "Yes, Mrs. Carraway showed me a draft of a new will a few days before she died. She was very secretive about it, insisting that it was private and that I should keep it confidential. Of St. Mary Mead provided a comforting backdrop to her restless thoughts. She sat down in her armchair, the events of the day replaying in her mind. The disappearance of the will, the suspicious behavior of Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel, and Emily's fearful confession all pointed toward a carefully concealed truth. Miss Marple knew that unraveling this mystery would require patience, subtlety, and an unwavering attention to detail. The following morning, Miss Marple set out to speak with Mr. Redcliffe. The antiques dealer's home was a quaint cottage on the Miss Marple's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "And what happened to this draft?" Emily looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know. After she showed it to me, she seemed even more anxious. The next morning, the draft was gone. She told me not to worry, but now I'm afraid something terrible has happened." Miss Marple reached out, offering a reassuring touch. "Thank you, Emily. Your honesty is greatly appreciated. Do you recall who else might have had access to Mrs. Carraway's study where the draft was kept?" Emily nodded. "Only a few people. Mr. Carraway, Mr. Redcliffe, and, James the butler. They all had keys to her study." Miss Marple considered this information carefully. The disappearance of the draft suggested deliberate interference, pointing towards someone with both motive and opportunity. Her suspicions now lay firmly within the household. Before Miss Marple could ask further questions, the drawing-room door opened abruptly, and Mr. Carroway entered, his expression stern. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, Mr. Carroway," Miss Marple replied courteously. "I was just speaking with Emily about some concerns regarding your sister's will." Mr. Carroway's eyes met hers briefly before he turned to leave, but not before Miss Marple caught a glimpse of unease flickering across his features. As he departed, Miss Marple remained seated, her mind racing with possibilities. That evening, Miss Marple found herself walking through the serene gardens of the Carroway estate, the twilight casting long shadows beneath the ancient oak trees. The tranquility of the setting belied the tension that had gripped the household, and Miss Marple's thoughts were a whirlwind of suspicions and unanswered questions. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to visit Colonel Bantry, hoping his insights might shed light on the growing mystery. The Colonel's residence was a short walk from the manor, a picturesque house with well-tended flower beds and a welcoming porch. Upon arrival, Miss Marple was greeted warmly by Colonel Bantry and his wife Dolly. They invited her inside, offering refreshments in the quiet place to converse. As they settled into the cozy drawing-room, Miss Marple wasted no time in presenting her concerns. "Colonel, I believe someone within the Carroway household may have tampered with Mrs. Carroway's will," she began, her tone measured. "The disappearance of a new draft suggests foul play, and I suspect that either Mr. Redcliffe or Lionel may be involved, given their proximity and potential motives." Colonel Bantry listened intently, his expression thoughtful. "That is a grave accusation, Miss Marple. However, without concrete evidence, it would be unfair to point fingers." "I understand, Colonel," Miss Marple replied gently, "but the circumstances are highly suspicious. Emily's account, combined with the solicitor's confirmation that no new will exists, indicate that someone may have had a vested interest in altering the terms of the estate." Dolly Bantry interjected thoughtfully. "Is true the Bognmitsum, Redcliffe and Lionel had reasons to be interested in Mrs. Carroway's estate. Mr. Redcliffe, with his antiques dealing, might have sought to acquire valuable items, while Lionel, as the sole heir, would benefit greatly from any changes to the will." Miss Marple nodded. "Precisely, and the fact that the draft has vanished suggests deliberate interference. I believe it's imperative to investigate further, perhaps by observing their actions and looking for any inconsistencies in their stories." The Colonel sighed, a look of concern crossing his features. "I will speak with both Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel, but I must urge caution. Accusations of this nature can have serious repercussions." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "Of course, Colonel, my intention is merely to uncover the truth and ensure that justice is served. I'm confident that with careful observation and thoughtful inquiry we can resolve this matter." As the evening progressed, Miss Marple thanked the Bantrys for their hospitality and made her way back to her own home. The village was now cloaked in the soft glow of streetlights, and the familiar sightsee outskirts of the village filled with an eclectic collection of artifacts from various eras. As she arrived, she was greeted by the sight of Mr. Redcliffe meticulously arranging a display of antique clocks. "Miss Marple, what a pleasant surprise," he greeted her warmly. "Please, come in. Can I offer you some tea?" "Thank you, Mr. Redcliffe," Miss Marple replied, accepting a seat. "I wanted to discuss your recent visits to Mrs. Carroway's home." Mr. Redcliffe nodded, his expression composed yet guarded. "Of course, I was merely assisting Mrs. Carroway in appraising some of her more valuable pieces. She has a remarkable collection, and it was my pleasure to help her curate it." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes observant. "I understand that you are interested in diversifying her collection. Did Mrs. Carroway ever mention anything about changing her will or her intentions regarding her estate?" Mr. Redcliffe hesitated slightly before responding. "No, she did not. Our discussions were strictly limited to her antiques. If there were any changes to her will, I was not made aware of them." Miss Marple nodded slowly, noting the slight tension in his jaw. "I see. And how would you describe your relationship with Mrs. Carroway? Was there any animosity or disagreement between you?" Mr. Redcliffe smiled politely. "Not at all. Mrs. Carroway was a discerning and intelligent woman. We had a professional relationship built on mutual respect. Any differences in opinion were purely related to the value and authenticity of certain pieces." Miss Marple considered his words carefully. "Thank you, Mr. Redcliffe. Your cooperation is greatly appreciated." Leaving the antiques dealer's home, Miss Marple's next destination was Lionel Carroway's residence. Lionel's home was a modern establishment compared to the traditional grandeur of the Carroway manor, reflecting his contemporary tastes and progressive mindset. As Miss Marple approached, she noticed Lionel standing on the veranda, his posture stiff and his expression guarded. He greeted her with a curt nod as she entered. "Miss Marple," he acknowledged, "to what do I owe the pleasure?" Miss Marple returned his nod with a gentle smile. "Good morning, Mr. Carroway. I wanted to discuss the recent developments regarding your aunt's will." Lionel's eyes narrowed slightly, but he maintained his composure. "I'm aware of the discussions, but as you know, I've always been in line as the sole heir. I fail to see what the concern is." Miss Marple inclined her head thoughtfully. "It's precisely that matter, Mr. Carroway. The notion that someone might have tampered with the will suggests that there could be more to the story. Have you noticed anything unusual in the days leading up to your aunt's passing?" Lionel frowned, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. Mrs. Carroway was under a great deal of stress managing the estate, especially with the potential changes proposed. But I'm not aware of anything that would suggest foul play. Miss Marple's eyes met his, searching for any signs of deception. Stress can often lead to irrational behavior. However, the disappearance of a new will suggests that someone wanted to prevent changes to the original document. Perhaps someone stood to gain more by ensuring the old will remained in effect. Lionel's jaw tightened. "I assure you, Miss Marple, my interests are purely legitimate. I have no reason to interfere with my aunt's testamentary intentions." Miss Marple nodded, though her suspicions remained. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Carroway. Your cooperation is most helpful." As she left Lionel's home, Miss Marple couldn't shake the feeling that the pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, albeit slowly. The persistence of Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel's sudden interest in the estate, coupled with the vanishing will, painted a picture of concealed motives and potential deceit. That evening, Miss Marple returned to her home, the village now bathed in the soft glow of twilight. She sat down at her writing desk, the flickering candle casting long shadows across her notes. The evidence was beginning to coalesce: the missing will, Emily's fearful confession, and the suspicious behavior of those closest to Mrs. Carroway. She pondered the interaction she had witnessed, recalling the subtle tensions and the evasive responses from both Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel. It was clear that someone within the household had a vested interest in ensuring the original will remained unaltered. The question was who? Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple decided to conduct a discreet investigation. She would observe the household members more closely, seeking out any inconsistencies or hidden agendas. Her keen eye for detail and her deep understanding of human nature were her greatest tools in this endeavor. The following morning, Miss Marple paid another visit to the Caraway estate, this time with the intent to observe and gather more information. She noticed subtle changes in the household's behavior, whispers behind closed doors, furtive glances exchanged between staff members, and an air of unease that seemed to hang over the manor. She began by speaking with James, the butler, whose professionalism remained intact, despite the underlying tension. "James," she greeted him gently, "I was hoping to discuss some matters regarding the household." James looked up, his expression polite yet wary. "Of course, Miss Marple. How can I assist you?" Miss Marple leaned forward, her tone reassuring. "I understand that the recent events have been distressing. I wanted to ensure that everything is in order and see if there's anything you've noticed that might help shed light on the situation." James sighed softly, his hands clasped in front of him. "The estate has been under a great deal of strain lately. With Mrs. Caraway's passing, there have been many changes, and everyone is trying to adjust. I haven't noticed anything out of the ordinary, but there is a sense of unease among the staff." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you, James. Your cooperation is invaluable." As she continued her tour of the manor, Miss Marple observed the interactions between the household members. There was a palpable tension between Mr. Caraway and Lionel, their conversations often terse and laden with unspoken frustrations. Mr. Redcliffe, on the other hand, maintained his professional demeanor, though Miss Marple sensed an underlying impatience. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Dolly Bantry, who had come to offer her assistance. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not intruding," Dolly said kindly. "I wanted to see if there's anything more I can do to help." "Not at all, Dolly. Your support is greatly appreciated," Miss Marple replied warmly. "If you have any additional information about Mrs. Caraway's recent activities or interactions, it would be most helpful." Dolly thought for a moment before speaking. "Well, there was something I noticed. A few days before her passing, Mrs. Caraway seemed particularly restless. She spent a lot of time in her study, going over papers and making numerous phone calls. I overheard her mentioning something about needing to protect her interests, but I didn't catch the details." Miss Marple's eyes lit up with interest. "Protect her interests, you say? That could be significant. It suggests that she was aware of potential threats to her estate, or perhaps someone trying to take advantage of her." Dolly nodded. "Yes, exactly. I wanted to say more, but I wasn't sure how to approach the topic without causing alarm." Miss Marple smiled gently. "You did the right thing by sharing this with me, Dolly. It's important that we consider all possibilities." As the day progressed, Miss Marple's suspicions deepened. The disappearance of the will, coupled with the behavior of those around her, pointed towards a deliberate attempt to manipulate the estate's distribution. The question remained, who had the motive and opportunity to carry out such an act? That evening Miss Marple sat by her fireplace, the room illuminated by the warm glow of the flames. She reviewed her notes, piecing together the fragments of information she had gathered. The involvement of Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel, the missing will, and the anxious behavior of Mrs. Caraway all hinted at a carefully orchestrated plan to alter the estate's outcome. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Dolly Bantry, who'd come to check on her. "I thought I'd see how you're getting on, Miss Marple." she said kindly. "Have you made any progress?" Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "Thank you, Dolly. I believe I'm beginning to see the outline of what may have transpired. There are a few pieces still missing, but I'm confident that with a bit more investigation, the truth will come to light." Dolly nodded, her expression thoughtful. "If there's anything I can do to help, please let me know." As Dolly departed, Miss Marple felt a renewed sense of determination. The mystery of the vanishing will was nearing its resolution, and she was steadfast in her resolve to uncover the truth. In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, amidst its serene facade, the shadows of deceit and ambition were slowly being illuminated by her unwavering pursuit of justice. With the evening now settled, Miss Marple prepared for the next steps in her investigation, knowing that the answers she sought were within reach. The delicate balance of village life hid many secrets, but Miss Marple was determined to reveal them, one thoughtful observation at a time. Chapter 5. Voices in the night. The sun had just begun its descent over St. Mary Mead, casting long shadows across the village green and bathing the thatched cottages in a warm amber glow. Miss Marple sat in her snug armchair, her knitting forgotten, as she pondered the unfolding mystery surrounding Mrs. Sylvia Carraway's untimely death. The gentle hum of evening preparations filled the air, children's laughter echoing from the nearby playground, and the distant clatter of a market stall winding down for the day. A knock at the door drew her attention. Setting aside her knitting, she rose gracefully and opened the door to find Mrs. Clement, the vicar's wife, standing on her doorstep. Mrs. Clement was a kindly woman, in her late 50s, her silver hair neatly pinned back and her dress modest, yet impeccably clean. "Good evening, Mrs. Clement," Miss Marple greeted her warmly. "Do come in. What brings you here at this hour?" Mrs. Clement stepped inside, her hands nervously wringing the edges of her shawl. "Good evening, Miss Marple. I hope I'm not intruding. I simply felt the need to speak with you about something that has been weighing heavily on my mind." Miss Marple gestured for her to take a seat by the fireplace, offering her a cup of tea. As Mrs. Clement settled into the chair, Miss Marple poured the steaming liquid, the fragrant aroma filling the room. "Please, make yourself comfortable," Miss Marple encouraged. "What is it that concerns you, Mrs. Clement?" Mrs. Clement took a deep breath, her eyes clouded with unease. "It's about the Carraway house. Last week on the evening of October the 3rd, I was walking home after evening service when I heard some rather strange noises coming from their residence." Miss Marple's curiosity was immediately piqued. "Strange noises, you say? Can you describe them for me?" "Well," Mrs. Clement began, her voice wavering slightly, "it was quite late, almost midnight. I heard a faint cry, almost like someone calling for help, but it was so soft that I couldn't make out the words. Then there was complete silence. I paused for a moment, wondering if I had imagined it, but the stillness remained." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her mind already weaving the threads of this new piece of information into the larger tapestry of the mystery. "Did you see anyone in the vicinity at that time?" "No, Miss Marple. The streets were empty, and the only light came from the gas lamps lining the road." "It was as if the house itself was the source of the disturbance," Mrs. Clement explained, her hands trembling slightly. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, her eyes distant as she recalled the details. "Thank you for sharing this with me, Mrs. Clement. It's important information. Did you happen to notice anything unusual about the Carraway household in the days leading up to that evening?" Mrs. Clement shook her head slowly. "Not particularly, no. Mrs. Carraway seemed her usual self, though there were murmurs among the villagers about her being more reclusive than usual. perhaps related to her recent dealings with Mr. Redcliffe and her nephew Lionel. Miss Marple gave a small, knowing smile. Yes, I've heard some of those whispers. Thank you, Mrs. Clement. Your observations are very valuable. As Mrs. Clement left, Miss Marple remained seated, her thoughts turning to the vicar's wife's account. Strange noises in the night could signify many things. Stress-induced hallucinations, natural disturbances, or perhaps something far more sinister. The faint cry, followed by an eerie silence, suggested a momentary lapse or an attempt to conceal something. Determined to delve deeper, Miss Marple decided to revisit the Carraway estate and examine the widow's last days more closely. The following morning, the village was abuzz with the usual activities. But a palpable tension lingered in the air, stemming from the recent events. Miss Marple arrived at the manor, greeted once more by James, the butler, whose stoic expression masked any personal concerns. "Good morning, Miss Marple," James said politely. "Is there something specific you'd like to discuss today?" "Good morning, James," Miss Marple replied warmly. "Yes, I'd like to inquire about the late Mrs. Carraway's activities in her final days. Specifically, I heard that Lionel stayed overnight the evening before her passing. Is that correct?" James nodded, his demeanor unchanged. "Yes, Mr. Carraway did spend the night there on the evening of October the 2nd. He claimed to have reconciled with his aunt after a long estrangement." Miss Marple thanked him and proceeded to the drawing-room, where Colonel Bantry was waiting for her, having arranged a meeting to discuss further developments. Dolly Bantry was also present, her presence a comforting anchor in the midst of the growing mystery. "Colonel Dolly," Miss Marple greeted them as she entered. "Thank you for joining me." "Of course, Miss Marple," Colonel Bantry replied. "We're eager to assist in any way we can." Miss Marple recounted Mrs. Clement's account of the strange noises, her tone measured yet inquisitive. This new piece of information might shed light on the circumstances surrounding Mrs. Carraway's death. A faint cry, followed by silence, suggests someone may have been in distress, or perhaps attempting to hide something. Dolly Bantry looked thoughtful. It's possible that Mrs. Carraway was experiencing severe anxiety or paranoia, as Emily mentioned. The noises could have been manifestations of her stress. Miss Marple nodded, but her intuition told her there was more to the story. Or perhaps there was an actual disturbance, someone trying to gain access to the estate or interfere with the Carraway family matters. Colonel Bantry frowned slightly. "That's a troubling thought. However, we must consider all possibilities. Mrs. Carraway was known to be meticulous and strong-willed. It's hard to imagine someone would want to harm her." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with determination. "True, Colonel, but it's important to leave no stone unturned. I believe the detail about Lionel staying overnight is significant. It places him at the scene shortly before Mrs. Carraway's death. I intend to look into his activities that evening." Dolly Bantry interjected gently. "Miss Marple, do you think Lionel is involved in any way?" "He did have motives related to the will and the estate." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "At this stage, it's too early to draw any conclusions, Dolly. My role is to gather the facts and observe the behavior of those involved. I simply note the details and see where they lead." As the conversation continued, Miss Marple's thoughts wandered back to the vicar's wife's account and the information she had gathered thus far. The overlapping interactions between Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel, the missing will, and now the strange noises, all pointed towards a web of concealed motives and hidden truths. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple decided to visit Emily once more, hoping to glean additional insights from the distressed maid. Emily was in the kitchen, her hands busy preparing a pot of tea, though her movements were hurried, and her eyes darted nervously around the room. "Good afternoon, Emily," Miss Marple greeted her softly. "May I have a word with you?" Emily glanced up, her expression weary but willing. "Of course, Miss Marple. How can I help you?" Miss Marple took a seat at the small kitchen table, her gaze gentle yet probing. "I wanted to ask you about the night of October the 3rd. Mrs. Carraway mentioned the new will to me before her passing. Did she say anything else that might help us understand her state of mind?" Emily hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her apron. She was very secretive that evening. She kept to herself, working late in her study. I heard her pacing, muttering to herself about the importance of protecting her interests. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And did you ever see her alone with anyone that evening? Any visitors or unusual guests?" Emily shook her head. "No, Miss Marple, she didn't have any visitors that night as far as I'm aware. The only person who stayed overnight was a nephew, Lionel. He was quiet and kept to himself, claiming he wanted to mend their relationship." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes kind yet incisive. "Did you notice anything unusual about Lionel's behavior that evening? Anything that might seem out of the ordinary?" Emily thought for a moment before answering. "He was unusually tense, Miss Marple. I saw him going in and out of Mrs. Carraway's study, carrying some papers. He didn't say much, but there was something about the way he moved, like he was hiding something." Miss Marple made a mental note of this observation. "Thank you, Emily. Your honesty is very much appreciated. If you remember anything else, no matter how small, please let me know." Miss Marple recounted Mrs. Clement's account of the strange noises, her tone measured yet inquisitive. This new piece of information might shed light on the circumstances surrounding Mrs. Carraway's death. A faint cry, followed by silence, suggests someone may have been in distress, or perhaps attempting to hide something. Dolly Bantry looked thoughtful. "It's possible that Mrs. Carraway was experiencing severe anxiety or paranoia, as Emily mentioned. The noises could have been manifestations of her stress." Miss Marple nodded, but her intuition told her there was more to the story. Or perhaps there was an actual disturbance, someone trying to gain access to the estate or interfere with the Carraway family matters. Colonel Bantry frowned slightly. "That's a troubling thought. However, we must consider all possibilities. Mrs. Carraway was known to be meticulous and strong-willed. It's hard to imagine someone would want to harm her." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with determination. "True, Colonel, but it's important to leave no stone unturned. I believe the detail about Lionel staying overnight is significant. It places him at the scene shortly before Mrs. Carraway's death. I intend to look into his activities that evening." Dolly Bantry interjected gently. "Miss Marple, do you think Lionel is involved in any way? He did have motives related to the will and the estate." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "At this stage, it's too early to draw any conclusions, Dolly. My role is to gather the facts and observe the behavior of those involved. I simply note the details and see where they lead." As the conversation continued, Miss Marple's thoughts wandered back to the vicar's wife's account and the information she had gathered thus far. The overlapping interactions between Mr. Redcliffe and Lionel, the missing will, and now the strange noises, all pointed towards a web of concealed motives and hidden truths. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple decided to visit Emily once more, hoping to glean additional insights from the distressed maid. Emily was in the kitchen, her hands busy preparing a pot of tea, though her movements were hurried and her eyes darted nervously around the room. "Good afternoon, Emily," Miss Marple greeted her softly. "May I have a word with you?" Emily glanced up, her expression weary but willing. "Of course, Miss Marple. How can I help you?" Miss Marple took a seat at the small kitchen table, her gaze gentle yet probing. "I wanted to ask you about the night of October the 3rd. Mrs. Carraway mentioned the new will to me before her passing. Did she say anything else that might help us understand her state of mind?" Emily hesitated, her fingers nervously twisting the edge of her apron. She was very secretive that evening. She kept to herself, working late in her study. I heard her pacing, muttering to herself about the importance of protecting her interests. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "And did you ever see her alone with anyone that evening? Any visitors or unusual guests?" Emily shook her head. "No, Miss Marple. She didn't have any visitors that night as far as I'm aware. The only person who stayed overnight was her nephew, Lionel. He was quiet and kept to himself, claiming he wanted to mend their relationship." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes kind yet incisive. "Did you notice anything unusual about Lionel's behavior that evening? Anything that might seem out of the ordinary?" Emily thought for a moment before answering. "He was unusually tense, Miss Marple. I saw him going in and out of Mrs. Carraway's study, carrying some papers. He didn't say much, but there was something about the way he moved, like he was hiding something." Miss Marple made a mental note of this observation. "Thank you, Emily. Your honesty is very much appreciated. If you remember anything else, no matter how small, please let me know." Back at her home, Miss Marple sat by her fireplace, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She reviewed her notes, the pieces of the puzzle slowly coming together. The vicar's wife's account, Emily's observations, and the details of Lionel's behavior all pointed towards a deeper, more intricate mystery. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the doorbell. It was James, the butler, bringing in a fresh pot of tea. "Here you are, Miss Marple," he said politely. "I thought you might like a refill." "Thank you, James," Miss Marple replied with a warm smile. "You're very kind." As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple felt a surge of determination. The voices in the night were but one piece of the larger mystery, and she was resolute in her quest to uncover the truth behind Mrs. Carraway's death. In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, amidst its serene facade, the shadows of deceit and ambition were beginning to emerge, and Miss Marple was steadfast in her pursuit of justice. With a final glance at her notes, she resolved to continue her investigation with the same gentle persistence that had served her so well in the past. The intricate tapestry of village life held many secrets, and Miss Marple was determined to reveal them, one thoughtful observation at a time. Chapter 6: Secrets in the Attic. The morning air in St. Mary Mead was crisp and clear, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves and the promise of a new day. Miss Marple arrived at the Carraway estate with a gentle determination, her mind abuzz with the recent discoveries. She'd arranged to visit under the guise of offering comfort to Emily, whose distress had only deepened since Mrs. Carraway's passing. As she approached the grand manor, the ivy-clad walls and sprawling gardens stood as silent sentinels to the secrets they held within. The butler, James, greeted her with his usual courteous demeanor. "Good morning, Miss Marple. It's lovely to see you again." "Good morning, James," Miss Marple replied warmly. "Please, if you could let me in. I'd like to speak with Emily." James nodded and led her into the drawing room, where Emily awaited, her posture tense and eyes shadowed with worry. The room, with its high ceilings and ornate fireplace, exuded an air of restrained elegance, but the atmosphere was thick with unspoken tensions. "Good morning, Emily," Miss Marple greeted gently, taking a seat opposite her. "How are you today?" Emily offered a weak smile, though her eyes betrayed her anxiety. "Good morning, Miss Marple. I'm managing, thank you." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "I thought I might spend some time with you today, perhaps talk about how you're coping. It's important to share your feelings." Emily hesitated for a moment before speaking. "It's been very difficult, Miss Marple. Sometimes I feel overwhelmed by everything that's happened." Miss Marple reached out, placing a comforting hand over Emily's. "I understand. If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm here to listen." After a few moments of quiet, Emily looked up, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a flicker of resolve. "There's something I haven't mentioned before. Mrs. Carraway was very protective of her attic. She spent a lot of time up there in her later years, and she seemed to find solace among the old belongings." Miss Marple's interest was piqued. "The attic, you say? Perhaps I could take a look, if you don't mind." Emily nodded, though a shadow of apprehension crossed her face. "Of course, Miss Marple. I can show you where it is." With James's permission, Miss Marple followed Emily up the narrow, creaking staircase to the attic. The air grew cooler as they ascended, the walls adorned with old photographs and antiques that hinted at the family's storied past. The attic was a treasure trove of memories, yet it held an air of melancholy, the dust-laden air thick with history. Emily led her to a corner of the attic where a heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar. "This is where Mrs. Carraway spent most of her time. She rarely let anyone enter without a good reason." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Emily. I appreciate your trust." Inside, the attic was a labyrinth of old trunks, faded curtains, and forgotten relics. Miss Marple's eyes were drawn to a particular area where layers of dust obscured a section of the floor. With a careful sweep of her hand, she uncovered an old wooden box, its surface marred by time, but still sturdy. "Look at this," she called softly to Emily, who approached with cautious curiosity. Together they opened the box, revealing a collection of yellowed letters and delicate documents. Miss Marple handled them with reverence, her fingers tracing the faded ink and brittle paper. "These seem quite old," she remarked, her eyes scanning the contents. Emily leaned in, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mrs. Carraway kept many things here. She never spoke much about them, though." Miss Marple gently lifted one of the letters, her keen eyes catching details that others might overlook. These letters appear to be correspondence between family members, dating back several decades. There's mention of a dispute over inheritance and some unresolved tensions. As Miss Marple delved deeper into the documents, a story began to emerge, one of jealousy, betrayal, and long-buried resentments. The letters hinted at a scandal involving a disputed heir, a broken promise, and a hidden alliance that had fractured the family years ago. "Interesting," Miss Marple mused aloud. "It seems there was quite a bit of turmoil in the Carraway family history. Perhaps some of these old wounds were never fully healed." Emily listened intently, her eyes wide with both fear and fascination. "Do you think this has anything to do with what happened to Mrs. Carraway?" Miss Marple considered the possibility. "It's certainly a thread worth pulling, Emily. Family secrets often have a way of resurfacing, especially in times of crisis." As they continued to sift through the contents of the box, Miss Marple's mind raced with questions. Who in the current household might have a vested interest in keeping these secrets hidden? And what could Sylvia Carraway have known that prompted her anxiety and her mention of a new will? Miss Marple carefully replaced the letters and documents, ensuring that nothing was out of place. "Thank you, Emily. This has been very enlightening. I believe these documents could provide valuable insight into the current situation." Emily nodded, her expression a mix of relief and lingering worry. "I just hope this helps us understand what happened." Miss Marple offered a reassuring smile. "I believe it will, Emily. Sometimes understanding the past is the key to unraveling the present." As they descended the stairs, Miss Marple felt a deeper understanding of the Carraway family dynamics. The old scandal hinted at unresolved conflicts and hidden motives that could very well be influencing the events of today. The discovery of the wooden box in the attic was more than just a relic of the past. It was a gateway to uncovering the truth behind Mrs. Carraway's mysterious death. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple sat in her cozy sitting room, the morning's findings swirling in her mind. The letters revealed a contentious relationship between Sylvia's grandparents and an unknown third party, a feud that had left scars on the family lineage. As she pondered the implications, she realized that the hidden family scandal could be the key to understanding the present tensions. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Colonel Bantry, his expression serious, but not unkind. "Miss Marple, I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, Colonel," she replied warmly. "Please, come in. I've just come across something that might shed more light on the Carraway situation." The Colonel took a seat, his gaze attentive. "I'm eager to hear what you've found." Miss Marple recounted the discovery of the old wooden box and the contents within, her tone measured and deliberate. "These documents suggest that there was significant strife within the Carraway family many years ago. It appears that certain members were at odds over inheritance, and this led to a long-standing resentment that may not have fully dissipated." Colonel Bantry frowned thoughtfully. "Inheritance disputes can breed a lot of ill will. It's possible that remnants of these old tensions are still present, even if not overtly expressed." Miss Marple nodded. "Indeed, I believe someone within the household might be leveraging these hidden resentments to influence the current situation, particularly concerning the will." The Colonel leaned forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Are you suggesting that there might be foul play involved in Mrs. Carraway's death?" "Not yet, Colonel," Miss Marple replied gently. "But the circumstances certainly warrant further investigation. The presence of a new will, the disappearance of the draft, and the discovery of these old letters all point towards hidden motives that need to be examined." Colonel Bantry sighed, his expression one of concern. "If there is someone within the household with a motive, we must approach this delicately to avoid unnecessary suspicion." Miss Marple smiled reassuringly. "Of course, Colonel, my approach will be subtle, allowing the truth to reveal itself naturally. Understanding the human nature behind these actions is often the key to solving such mysteries." As the conversation drew to a close, Miss Marple felt a renewed sense of purpose. The attic had revealed a crucial piece of the puzzle, and she was determined to follow this thread to its conclusion. The long-buried family scandal was now intertwined with the present-day mystery, and uncovering the connections would be essential to solving the case. That evening, Miss Marple took a leisurely walk through the village, the setting sun casting a golden glow over the familiar streets of St. Mary Mead. She passed by Mrs. Dobbins's bakery, where the tantalizing aroma of freshly baked scones wafted through the air, momentarily lifting her spirits. Yet her mind remained focused on the mystery at hand. As she strolled past the vicarage, she noticed Mrs. Clement tending to her garden, the twilight enhancing the vibrant colors of her flowers. Miss Marple approached her gently. "Good evening, Mrs. Clement. I wanted to thank you once again for sharing your experience with me." Mrs. Clement smiled warmly. "It's no trouble, Miss Marple. I'm glad to help in any way I can." Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. I believe the secrets of the past are essential to understanding the present. If you happen to recall anything else about the noises you heard or any other unusual occurrences, please do not hesitate to inform me." Mrs. Clement nodded, her eyes reflecting a mix of worry and hope. "I will, Miss Marple." "Thank you." As Miss Marple continued her walk, she pondered the significance of the attic discovery. The old family scandal hinted at motivations rooted in greed and resentment, emotions that could easily resurface under the right circumstances. She considered the current household members, Mr. Carraway, Lionel, Mr. Redcliffe, and the trusted staff, and their potential connections to the hidden truths of the past. Returning home, Miss Marple sat by her fireplace, the flickering flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. She reviewed the letters once more, her mind piecing together the intricate web of relationships and motives, the vanishing will, the old family feud, and the strange noises, all elements that suggested a deliberate attempt to manipulate the estate's outcome. Her thoughts were interrupted by the soft chime of the doorbell. It was James, the butler, bringing in a fresh pot of tea. "Here you are, Miss Marple. I thought you might like a refill." "Thank you, James," Miss Marple replied with a warm smile. "You are always so thoughtful." As she poured herself a cup of tea, Miss Marple felt a sense of clarity begin to emerge. The secrets in the attic were not just relics of the past, they were keys to understanding the present turmoil. Someone within the household was leveraging these buried resentments to influence the distribution of the estate, and uncovering their identity was paramount. Determined to follow this new lead, Miss Marple resolved to continue her investigation with the same gentle persistence that had served her so well. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead held many secrets, but with her keen observation and deep understanding of human nature, she was confident that the truth would soon come to light. As night settled over the village, Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to align, and she was steadfast in her quest to reveal the hidden truths that had long been concealed within the walls of the Carraway estate. With each thoughtful observation and every subtle clue, she moved closer to unraveling the mystery, one secret at a time. Audrey, Chapter 7, An Ominous Revelation. The sun had just begun its descent, casting a warm golden hue over the picturesque village of St. Mary Mead. The quaint tea shop, the Willow's Whisper, stood nestled between the florists and the local bookshop, its windows gleaming softly in the afternoon light. The aroma of freshly baked scones and brewing tea wafted through the air, mingling with the crisp scent of autumn leaves. Miss Marple decided to visit the tea shop, hoping to observe the daily interactions of the villagers and perhaps find a moment of respite from her ongoing investigation into Mrs. Sylvia Carraway's mysterious death. The village was alive with its usual charm. Children laughed as they played hopscotch on the pavement, and elderly couples strolled arm in arm, exchanging pleasantries. As she entered the tea shop, the familiar sight of Mrs. Potts behind the counter greeted her warmly. The elderly woman's face lit up with recognition. "Miss Marple, so lovely to see you. What can I get you today?" "A pot of Earl Grey, please, Mrs. Potts," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile, "and perhaps a slice of your famous apple pie." "Coming right up," Mrs. Potts said cheerfully, already bustling about to prepare her order. Miss Marple took a seat by the window, the perfect vantage point to observe the comings and goings of the villagers. She sipped her tea slowly, enjoying the quiet hum of conversation that filled the room. As she gazed out, her keen eyes caught sight of Mr. Harold Redcliffe entering the shop. The antiques dealer had become a figure of considerable interest in her investigation, given his frequent visits to the Caraway estate and his recent revelations about the missing will. Mr. Redcliffe was a distinguished man in his early 50s, with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of refined elegance. He carried himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to negotiating valuable transactions, yet there was an undercurrent of unease in his demeanor today. Miss Marple watched as he approached the counter, exchanging pleasantries with Mrs. Potts before ordering a cup of tea. Curiosity piqued, Miss Marple decided to seize the opportunity for a conversation. When Mr. Redcliffe had taken his tea and settled into a nearby chair, she rose and approached him with her characteristic gentle grace. "Mr. Redcliffe, a pleasure to see you again," Miss Marple greeted him warmly. "May I join you for a moment?" Mr. Redcliffe looked up, slightly surprised but pleased by her presence. "Miss Marple, of course. Please have a seat." She took the seat opposite him, her eyes reflecting her genuine interest. "I hope you're finding some comfort in our lovely village during this difficult time." "Thank you, Miss Marple," he replied, his voice steady yet tinged with melancholy. "It has its comforts, indeed." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. "I wanted to speak with you about Mrs. Caraway's estate. You mentioned previously that she was interested in diversifying her collection. Could you tell me more about that?" Mr. Redcliffe sighed softly, his gaze drifting to the window before returning to Miss Marple. Mrs. Caraway had a discerning eye for antiques. She was always on the lookout for pieces that held both aesthetic beauty and historical significance. Recently, she expressed an interest in acquiring some rare items to enhance her collection further. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully. "I understand you were particularly interested in a certain gold brooch. Could you elaborate on that?" A shadow crossed Mr. Redcliffe's face, his expression growing more serious. "Yes, the brooch. Mrs. Caraway owned a remarkable piece, a gold brooch with intricate filigree work. What made it truly unique was a hidden compartment, designed to hold a small keepsake or document. She confided in me that she was considering selling it, though she had not yet made a final decision." Miss Marple's interest deepened, her mind already piecing together the implications. "A hidden compartment, you say? Did Mrs. Caraway ever mention what she intended to keep inside it?" Mr. Redcliffe hesitated, his eyes meeting hers with a hint of apprehension. "She was rather vague about it, but she did imply that whatever was inside was of great personal importance. She believed it held something she needed to protect, something that must not fall into the wrong hands." Miss Marple sensed the gravity of his words, her intuition telling her that the brooch was more than just a valuable antique. "And do you know if the brooch is still in her possession, or has it been passed on since her passing?" Mr. Redcliffe shook his head slowly. "As far as I am aware, the brooch is still in the Caraway household. However, with Mrs. Caraway's sudden death, there has been some confusion about its whereabouts. To my knowledge, it has not been seen since her passing." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing with possibilities. "Thank you, Mr. Redcliffe. This information is most helpful. If you hear or see anything else related to the brooch, please do not hesitate to inform me. As Mr. Redcliffe rose to leave, Miss Marple couldn't help but feel that the gold brooch was a pivotal piece of the puzzle. The hidden compartment suggested that Mrs. Carraway was safeguarding something of great significance, something that could potentially unravel the mystery of her untimely death. Just as Mr. Redcliffe was about to depart, Miss Marple spoke again, her voice soft yet insistent. "Mr. Redcliffe, may I ask, did Mrs. Carraway ever express any concerns about someone trying to obtain the brooch? Or perhaps threatening her in any way?" Mr. Redcliffe paused, his expression clouded with uncertainty. "Now that you mention it, there was an unusual incident a few months ago. Mrs. Carraway received an anonymous letter demanding the brooch in exchange for silence about her family's secret. She was visibly shaken by it and took extra precautions to secure her valuables thereafter." Miss Marple's eyes sparkled with the thrill of the investigation. "That's a significant detail, Mr. Redcliffe. Thank you for sharing it." With a final nod of gratitude, Mr. Redcliffe left the tea shop, leaving Miss Marple to contemplate the weight of his revelations. The gold brooch with its hidden compartment was evidently more than a mere family heirloom. It was a vessel for secrets that someone desperately wanted to keep concealed. Determined to uncover the truth, Miss Marple left the tea shop and made her way back to her home. As she walked through the familiar streets of St. Mary Mead, her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The missing brooch, the anonymous letter, and the mention of a family secret all pointed towards a deeper, more sinister plot lurking beneath the village's tranquil exterior. Upon reaching her home, Miss Marple decided to review the documents she had discovered in the attic once more. The old letters hinted at a family scandal involving disputed inheritances and long-held grudges. Combining this with the new information about the brooch, she began to form a clearer picture of the motives at play. She recalled Mr. Redcliffe's mention of the anonymous letter and wondered who, within or outside the family, might have sent it. The hidden compartment in the brooch suggested that Mrs. Carraway had something to hide, perhaps evidence of the family scandal that someone wanted to keep buried. Miss Marple knew that the key to solving this mystery lay in uncovering what was concealed within the brooch. Without it, the truth remained elusive. She pondered the possible suspects: Lionel Carraway, with his estranged relationship and vested interest in the estate; Mr. Redcliffe, who might have wanted to control or exploit the valuable heirloom; or perhaps someone else entirely, someone who knew about the family's dark past and sought to use it to their advantage. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her fireplace, her thoughts focused and determined. The brooch was the missing link, the piece that could potentially unravel the web of deceit surrounding Mrs. Carraway's death. She decided that her next step would be to search the Carraway estate more thoroughly, particularly the areas Sylvia frequented, such as her study and the attic where the box had been found. The following morning, Miss Marple returned to the manor, her presence greeted by James, the butler, who offered a polite smile. "Good morning, Miss Marple. How may I assist you today?" "Good morning, James," Miss Marple replied warmly. "I was hoping to examine some of the rooms Mrs. Carraway frequented, particularly her study and the attic. I believe there may be clues we've yet to uncover." James nodded, his expression composed. "Of course, Miss Marple. The study is on the second floor, and the attic can be accessed via the staircase in the hall. If you require any assistance, please let me know." Miss Marple thanked him and made her way to the study. The room was a reflection of Mrs. Carraway's meticulous nature, with shelves lined with books, antique furnishings, and personal mementos that hinted at her refined tastes. She began to search the room carefully, looking for anything that might relate to the missing brooch or the hidden compartment. After a thorough examination, Miss Marple turned her attention to a large desk at the center of the room. Among the papers and documents, she found a faded photograph of Mrs. Carroway with her family, the edges worn from years of handling. Behind the photograph, she discovered a small, intricately carved box. Her heart quickened as she opened it, revealing an assortment of personal items, and much to her surprise, the missing gold brooch. Relief and excitement washed over her as she held the brooch in her hands. She carefully examined it, noting the hidden compartment that had been mentioned. With delicate precision, she opened it to reveal a small bundle of old letters and a folded piece of parchment. The letters were dated several decades ago, corresponding with the family scandal hinted at in the attic. Miss Marple's eyes sparkled with understanding as she pieced together the significance of the documents. The brooch was indeed the key to the mystery, containing evidence that someone had sought to keep buried. The letters detailed a dispute over inheritance, betrayals, and promises that had never been fulfilled. It became clear that these secrets had resurfaced, potentially motivating someone to take drastic measures to protect their interests. As she pondered the implications, Miss Marple realized that the missing brooch had been deliberately hidden, perhaps stolen, to prevent the revelation of the family's dark past. The anonymous letter, the increased anxiety of Mrs. Carroway, and the disappearance of the new will all pointed towards a calculated attempt to manipulate the estate's distribution. With the brooch now in her possession, Miss Marple felt a surge of determination. She knew that the next steps would involve confronting the suspects with the evidence she had uncovered. The quiet village of St. Mary Mead, with its serene facade, had revealed layers of hidden motives and long-buried secrets, and Miss Marple was resolute in her quest to bring the truth to light. That evening, as twilight settled over the village, Miss Marple sat down with her notes, the gold brooch resting beside her. She reflected on the threads of the mystery, confident that the pieces were beginning to align. The brooch was the linchpin, the artifact that connected past grievances to present deceit. As she gazed into the flickering flames of her fireplace, Miss Marple felt a sense of anticipation. The final pieces of the puzzle were within reach, and she was prepared to navigate the intricate web of relationships and motives to uncover the truth. In the quiet village of St. Mary Mead, amidst its charming streets and well-tended gardens, the shadows of deceit were slowly being illuminated by her unwavering pursuit of justice. With a final glance at the brooch, Miss Marple knew that the resolution of this mystery was imminent. The secrets hidden in the attic, the ominous revelation of the brooch's significance, and the intricate dance of human motives were all converging towards a conclusion that would bring clarity to the enigmatic death of Mrs. Sylvia Carroway. And as always, it was Miss Marple's keen observation and deep understanding of human nature that would ultimately reveal the truth. Chapter 8: The Widow's Whisper. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of the Carroway estate, painting the sprawling gardens in hues of gold and amber. The village of St. Mary Mead seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, as Miss Marple prepared to unveil the truth that had eluded her for so long. The grand manor, usually a symbol of stoic elegance, now stood as the stage for the final act of this intricate mystery. Inside the drawing room, the atmosphere was tense. Emily stood near the fireplace, her hands clasped tightly together, her eyes darting nervously between the gathered individuals. Lionel Carraway, a man whose stern exterior had long concealed his inner turmoil, sat rigidly beside Mr. Redcliffe, the distinguished antiques dealer whose professional facade now seemed brittle. Across from them, Mr. Harold Fenwick the solicitor maintained a composed demeanour, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Miss Marple entered the room gracefully, her presence commanding yet soothing. She carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen much and understood more. The guests rose to greet her, their expressions a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "Thank you all for coming," Miss Marple began, her voice calm and measured. "I believe the time has come to address the unfortunate events surrounding Mrs. Sylvia Carraway's passing." She took a seat at the center of the room, her eyes meeting each of the attendees with a piercing yet gentle gaze. "Over the past weeks, we have uncovered several pieces of this puzzle, and it is my duty to bring them together to reveal the truth." Miss Marple reached into her handbag and retrieved the gold brooch, its intricate filigree catching the light. This brooch, a cherished heirloom of the Carraway family, held more than just sentimental value. Within its hidden compartment lay Mrs. Carraway's new will, a document that would have altered the distribution of her estate significantly. She paused, allowing the weight of her words to settle in the room. "Mr. Lionel Carraway, you discovered this will and, upon overhearing your aunt's intention to disinherit you, chose to destroy it. This act of desperation and greed led to Mrs. Carraway's untimely death." Lionel's face paled, his earlier composure crumbling under the weight of Miss Marple's revelation. I didn't mean for any of this to happen," he stammered, his voice breaking. Miss Marple continued, her tone unwavering. "Sylvia's death was no accident. The poison was carefully administered in her nightly tea, a method that ensured it was undetectable yet fatal. Your stay at the manor coincided with the final days of her life, providing you the perfect opportunity to carry out such a deed." She then turned her attention to Emily. "Emily, out of fear, you concealed fragments of the broken brooch in the attic. This was a brave act, preserving the evidence that led us to uncover the truth." Emily nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "I couldn't let anything happen to Mrs. Carraway. She was kind to me, despite her stern nature." Mr. Redcliffe stepped forward, his professional demeanour now supplanted by genuine concern. "Miss Marple, I had no idea. I was only assisting Mrs. Carraway with her antiques, unaware of the turmoil brewing within her family." Miss Marple offered him a reassuring smile. "Thank you, Mr. Redcliffe, for your cooperation. It is clear that the true motive behind this tragedy lies within the family itself." She then addressed the solicitor, Mr. Fenwick. "And you, Mr. Fenwick, can you explain why no new will was found, despite Sylvia's mention of it?" Mr. Fenwick swallowed hard, his usual composure faltering. I was unaware of any new will until Miss Marple uncovered its existence. Sylvia never formally presented it for legal filing, which was highly irregular." Miss Marple nodded knowingly. "It appears that Sylvia intended to protect her true intentions until the very end. Unfortunately, her trust was betrayed by someone she loved." Lionel, now visibly distraught, sank back into his chair. "I never wanted this. I only wanted what was rightfully mine after her passing." Miss Marple leaned forward, her eyes softening. "Lionel, your actions were driven by desperation and greed, but it is important to understand the consequences of such choices. Mrs. Carraway's life was ended prematurely by your hand, a tragic outcome born from unresolved familial tensions. The room fell silent, the gravity of the situation weighing heavily on everyone present. Miss Marple's gentle yet incisive approach had laid bare the truth, leaving no room for denial or evasion. As the initial shock began to ebb, Lionel broke down, his voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. I thought if I could secure the estate, everything would be all right. But I was wrong." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "The path to redemption begins with acknowledging one's mistakes. While nothing can undo what has been done, taking responsibility is the first step toward healing." Emily, still shaken, looked up with gratitude. "Thank you, Miss Marple. Without your help, none of this would have come to light." Mr. Redcliffe nodded solemnly. "Indeed, it is a somber reminder of how fragile trust can be." Mr. Fenwick stepped forward, his voice steady. "We will ensure that justice is served appropriately. The estate will be managed in accordance with the original will, restoring what was intended by Mrs. Carroway." As the room began to process the revelation, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of reflection. The tragedy that had unfolded was a stark reminder of the destructive power of human frailty, of how greed and desperation could overshadow love and trust. She quietly whispered to herself, if only people understood the real treasures of life were honesty and kindness. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Miss Marple took a solitary walk through the now quiet gardens of the Carroway estate. The gentle rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets provided a soothing backdrop to her contemplations. The evening air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming jasmine and the lingering warmth of the day. She paused beneath the ancient oak tree, its branches stretching out like protective arms over the estate. The resolution of the mystery had brought closure to those involved, yet the sorrow of what had transpired lingered like a shadow. Miss Marple's thoughts wandered to the delicate balance of human relationships and the ease with which trust could be shattered. As she gazed up at the starlit sky, Miss Marple felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Justice had been served, and the truth had been unveiled through her unwavering dedication and keen observation. Yet she couldn't help but mourn the loss of a life that could have been spared from such a tragic end. Returning to her home, Miss Marple settled into her armchair, a cup of tea in hand, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. The village of St. Mary Mead had once again proven that beneath its serene exterior lay layers of complexity and hidden motives. But with patience, intuition, and a deep understanding of human nature, even the most intricate mysteries could be unraveled. As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple smiled softly to herself, knowing that she'd made a difference in the lives of those she had touched. The lessons learned from this case would linger in her mind, a testament to the enduring power of honesty and kindness in a world often clouded by deceit and ambition. The night enveloped the village in a peaceful silence, the events of the past week settling into memory. Miss Marple gazed out of her window, the moon casting a silvery glow over the familiar streets of St. Mary Mead. She felt a sense of contentment, knowing that justice had prevailed and that the true treasures of life, the bonds of family, the integrity of one's character, and the strength of compassion had been reaffirmed. In the quiet of her home, Miss Marple allowed herself a moment of gratitude for the simple yet profound truths that guided her every step. As the village slept, she remained vigilant, ever ready to uncover the hidden stories that lay beneath the surface, ensuring that justice and kindness would continue to illuminate the path forward.